The glass hit the tile and shattered like a small, private apocalypse. It exploded under my foot with a sound that cut through the music and the laughter, a clean, crystalline punctuation that turned a summer night into a crime scene. For a second everything stuttered. The string quartet tucked behind the far banister, the hum of conversations, the metallic tang of the wine on my tongue. I watched the shards crawl across the floor like beaten promises. My wife, Lena, was on her knees, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other reaching for a fallen shoe. Her face was the color of candle wax, pupils blown wide and wet. Around us the party continued, polite and loud and indifferent, and in that indifference my throat tightened with a fear I could not name. She had had too much to drink, I told myself. I said it as if the words could restructure the moment into something ordinary. Too much. A phrase like armor. I helped her up because my hand still remembered the lean of her hips, the way she folded into me when the world narrowed to two. We walked to the couch, and I tucked the blanket around her knees as if I could also tuck away whatever tremor was sliding under her skin. "You okay?" I asked. She smiled, a watery, apologetic smile that might have been honest. "Don't make a fuss," she whispered. "I just went a little fast." That night should have been a tidy memory. Friends, a rooftop, cheap jazz, and the kind of champagne that makes you forget bills until morning. Instead it became the hinge on which everything later swung. Because midnight arrives and Lena is gone. I found her phone on the low table, face down, a single notification glowing on its lock screen until the battery died. Her coat was where she'd dropped it. Her purse was there, zip undone, lipstick a smear on the inner pocket. Glasses, a packet of Tic Tacs she didn't like but kept anyway. There were little evacuations of her life scattered like breadcrumbs. She had stepped away to the balcony, I thought at first. Maybe she went to the ladies' room and lost her balance. Maybe she had gone to the taxi and forgotten to tell me. I checked the stairwell, the alley, the cars that crammed the curb. I knocked on doors, I shouted her name until my voice was hoarse and raw. Everyone was kind in their way, sympathetic, shaky, but kindness, at that moment, felt like a room full of strangers offering me polite blankets. An hour passed. 2. The sky unlaced itself, a cold blue that smelled of rain. The party thinned. People left in couples, wrapped in scarves, their arms stitched together as if this ordinary intimacy could inoculate them against catastrophe. I called her parents. Her mother answered in sleep and then switched, groggy, to panic. "Maybe she went with someone," her mother said, and in the way her voice folded I could hear the accusation trying to strain free. I wanted to believe it wasn't true. I wanted to tell myself that missing persons happen all the time, that people get distracted, that Lena would return with a dramatic apology and a story about the kind stranger who'd helped her home. At 3 a.m, a text, "I'm sorry. I don't remember. Ill." The message was one sentence rifled through static. It landed in my chest like a pickaxe. I read it twice, trying to parse punctuation for sanity. She didn't remember what? The night. Where she'd been. Me. I scrolled back, looking for a context that wasn't there. There were messages from friends asking for rides, pictures she had posted, a meme she'd sent hours before. Then that line, "I'm sorry. I don't remember." No explanation, no location, no "I'm okay," nothing to place the shape of the absence. I sat on the floor and let the message live inside me. My first thought wasn't blame. It was a memory of Lena as a child, stubborn and bruised from falling out of cherry trees, always certain she'd be fine. There is a particular optimism in those who refuse to be careful. They believe the world will catch them. I wanted to rescue that Lena, the one who believed, the one who trusted. I wanted to reassemble her from the fragments of her texts. When she finally stumbled back through our front door at dawn, she smelled like someone else's perfume and the wet edge of the street. I had been pacing the kitchen, eyes hollow with too little sleep, when I heard her. Her steps were slower than usual, as if fear itself had mapped her gait. She clutched a paper bag to her chest like contraband. Her hair was a mess of knots, her lipstick an exhausted ring at the corner of her mouth. She moved toward me with the very small, private plea people make for forgiveness before they know what they've done. "Where did you go?" I asked. I thought I would collapse if she told me a simple lie. It is oppressive how much power a small truth holds, to unmake a night's worth of terror with one untroubled sentence. "I don't remember," she said. She dropped the bag and hugged me like drowning. I don't remember anything from after the toast. I woke up in a cab. I remember music, and then nothing, and then the cab. "Did you call anyone? Did you?" My sentences frayed. Questions splinter like glass. "No." Her hands were warm and shaking. "I don't remember calling. I didn't mean to." She looked at me then, and there it was, the blank, the hospital pale honesty people give you when they don't yet understand the scale of what they've done. "I love you," she said, and I wanted to believe it so hard that belief pulsed through me like light. For a while I let myself dwell in that belief. Months of redefining the contours of our life had taught me the mechanics of denial. You name a thing only so you can place it, then you practice ignoring its shadow until it becomes a feature of the furniture. I told myself a story. Lena had had a rare blackout from the alcohol. She had been terrified and disoriented. She had made poor choices in that half-sleep. Everyone slips, sometimes. I held the pieces she offered me and taped them together with patience. But the mind is a scampering animal that notices too much. Small inconsistencies began to etch themselves like hairline fractures. There was the faint scent on her sleeve that was not perfume but something metallic and sharp, the way she flinched at certain songs on the radio as if they were dangerous, the defensiveness in her voice when I asked small, harmless questions. "Who left that message on your phone?" I'd ask, and she'd say, "What message?" with a laugh that tried and failed to be light. The dissonance made me dizzy. I started listening for misalignment like a metal detector, trying to identify the frequency of untruth. 3 weeks after the party, the letter arrived. It was on thick paper, folded with the slow deliberateness of someone who still believed in the weight of written words. There was no return address. Inside, a single photograph lay atop a note so curt I thought at first it might be a business card. The photograph was taken from across a restaurant, a smear of light and shadow that telegraphed a clandestine tenderness. Lena sat at a table, head tilted, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled when she looked at me in months. The arm around her shoulders was not mine. The hand on her cheek was not mine. The man in the photo had a profile like a cliff and a laugh carved into his face. His hairline was familiar to me because I had seen it in her phone once, an old classmate, the kind of name that slides under the skin like a splinter, Jonah. The note beneath the photograph read, "We don't know how much you know. A friend." I kept that photograph in my pocket for 3 days, folding and unfolding it like a talisman and a weapon. When I finally confronted her with it, her face turned that same candle wax color I had seen the night she fell. She pressed a palm to her forehead as if she physically could keep the world from spinning. "I don't remember that," she said. The sentence landed like gravel on the tile. Her voice hung at the edge of denial and collapse. I don't know. I remember drinks, and laughing, and the toast. I don't. "We have a photograph," I said. I didn't shout. There was no need. The photograph was itself an indictment. "You're laughing with him. You're..." "I don't remember." Her eyes flooded. "I love you. I love you. I love you." The words were a prayer repeated until it dissolved. People believe memory is linear, a film reel that rewinds and plays cleanly. But memory is more often a ruined house. Rooms have collapsed, wallpaper peeled away. You step over rubble and hope for a corridor that leads somewhere familiar. Lena's memory had holes, and in those holes a life had been built. I wanted to hate her. The righteous fury of betrayal appealed to something neat and moral inside me. It would have been simpler to be the aggrieved party, to enact punishments, to swap love for righteous separation. But the truth is uglier. My brain started to catalogue the ways I had loved her. I remembered nights when she had saved my life from the slow erosion of work and bad sleep, when she had kept her hand on the small of my back at hospital corridors, when she had come to my father's funeral and arranged the flowers like a touchstone. Love is sticky. It clings in places hatred cannot reach. Every time I imagined turning my back, those memories yanked me back. Still, the photograph hung between us like a new organ. It made ordinary touch taxable. We learned to live with its presence like a scar, visible, awkward, sometimes helpful in reminding us not to bump the wrong way. Lena insisted again on blackout. insisted on therapy and on blood tests, on sleep studies. I wanted to believe in the ethics of second chances. It felt, perversely, like something noble. Lena was contrite in the way addicts can be, apologetic, ashamed, sincere. She audited her spending, deleted numbers from her phone, texted the man in the photograph only once and then blocked him. For a while, she slept at my side and did not move. Suspicion, though, is an invasive species. It colonizes small things, a creased receipt she couldn't explain, a lipstick on a collar that didn't match any of her tubes, the way she hummed along to songs she claimed not to know. My questions shifted shape, from direct confrontation to the subtler, more invasive inventory of privacy. I checked her browser history, and there it was, an email subject line with the name Jonah in it, a string of messages I had no right to read. The texts were short, flirtatious, careful. There was nothing explicit beyond kisses and shared jokes, but intimacy is sometimes not a line but a slope. It is built in small acorns. The slope had, apparently, been gathering frost under our feet for longer than I had suspected. The first time I pressed her about the messages, she cried. She accused me of betrayal for reading her private letters. "We promised," she said. "We promised no secrets." Her argument had the circular logic of someone cornered. Every attempt to interrogate produced a defense that felt like proof. I remember that night with perfect clarity, the way light from the fridge painted the kitchen in sickly blue, the way the kettle whispered, the way we both moved like people who had been taught to survive by negotiation. "I don't remember him," she said again. "Or I didn't. I can't," she swallowed. Maybe it was different because it felt different. Different how? I demanded. She touched the photograph on the table as if it were a wound. "It felt like someone else," she said. "It felt like being somebody else for a minute. When we broke up, don't you remember? After college. I was fragile. I loved him then. Maybe I didn't close it properly." The line about their old history was like pouring oil on an ember. It explained and it deflected and it made the wound smell all the more pungent. The idea that Lena carried a small, secret lineage of love with her, the husk of a former self, made my heart sharpen. People are not monoliths. They are palimpsests. We all carry the ink of former loves in the edges of our sentences. But there is a difference between a scar and a live wire. I tried to catalogue the meaning of her forgetfulness. There are medical ways to understand blackouts, syncope, dissociative episodes, the chemical erasure that alcohol manufactures by overriding hippocampal function. There are also moral ways to understand it, choices that leave you with a ledger to be reconciled. But the ledger lay open and blank. I could not find the names on its columns. All I had were the photos and her apologies and the intermittent insistence that she could not remember. At night I dreamt of being an investigator in my own life. I put on a suit of meticulousness and followed breadcrumbs into dark corners, mapping the paths she took, trying to identify when she crossed a line that had not been there before. Each discovery felt like a tiny theft, a laugh on a voicemail, a receipt with 2 wineglasses on it, a voicemail that began with a pet name I had never heard before. I found a voicemail where man's voice, gravel and soft, said, "You left so quickly," and then Lena's laugh spilled like water. She called him Jonas in the message. In the photograph he had been Jonah. Names, I learned, are slippery things. There is a moment in long-term relationships when the future becomes a geography you can map. You lay roads and name suburbs in your mind. Vacations, retirement plans, grandchildren. Betrayal is an earthquake. It doesn't just break one house, it reshapes the whole map. The discovery of the photograph reconfigured every map we had made together. It taught me that histories live parallel to the life you share, that some parts of a person are always other people's property. It taught me that trust, once fractured, is like ice. You might walk on it for a while, but you are always listening for the crack. That is where we found ourselves, in a fragile truce where every small kindness felt bartered, and every silence like a loaded gun. We stayed together because we were both too exhausted to move, because the logistics of disentangling 2 accumulated decades of joint accounts, of dog collars and shared doctors, felt more punishing than staying. We stayed because my fear of losing her was a physical ache. We stayed because love is not always heroic. Sometimes it is stubbornness, or convenience, or habit. But we were both alert, like animals, attuned to the slightest shift in the air. And then, when I had begun to accept this new topography, she disappeared again. Not in the obvious way of leaving the house, but in the subtle evaporation of a story. The second disappearance was quieter, more methodical. Lena left our bed at 3 in the morning and took a shower. She packed a bag, and when I asked where she was going, she said she needed to think and would be back by noon. Her voice was ordinary, which was the most terrifying thing. The casualness of it was the thing that carried the blade. She walked out in slippers, the small sound of them against the pavement a punctuation. I watched her go until the street swallowed her. I did not follow. I thought I knew the pattern, the fragile script. I thought I would never be the man who stalks his wife through the city like a private detective. Later that day, she didn't answer my calls. She didn't answer my texts. The police weren't involved, I hadn't called them. There was a different terror now, a low, simmering dread that had the quality of boredom, the boredom of watching the same bruise darken. I sat on the stairs and waited until night, until the small hours again, when the city felt like the inside of a shell. She came back carrying a bouquet of lilies, apologizing like a woman who had learned the forms of repentance. I needed to see him, she said. I needed to say thank you for what we had. It was over, but I needed closure. She said the word with a tone like a coin, practiced, cold, and somehow clinical. Closure. I echoed. You go to him for closure and not to me. She set the lilies in a vase and arranged them with her usual careful hands. Closure doesn't belong to you, she said. I needed to do something for me. Her answer felt like a verdict. I wish I could say the election was different, that I rose to the moral clarity one expects from heroes in novels. But the truth is messier. I loved her, I wanted her back, I wanted to forgive and to be forgiven. I also wanted the earth to open and swallow the photograph, to know it, to make the fracture heal without surgery. That ambivalence is its own kind of cruelty, the slow paralysis of wanting both to leave and to stay. And in that paralysis, the story continued, a house filled with small battles, with midnight talks that led nowhere, with the ache of a husband who counted the minutes until forgiveness arrived and the secret of a wife who kept forgetting the shape of her own history. The confrontation began with a cup of coffee gone cold. I had rehearsed 1,000 scenes in my head, the cinematic confrontation, the hiss of a slammed door, the words that would end us like a clean incision, and none of them matched the way truth felt in the flesh, dull, persistent, and utterly banal. It was a Tuesday. The house smelled of rain and damp newspaper. Lena sat at the kitchen table picking at a croissant like it was something she didn't trust to be whole. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The photograph lay between us like a third, unblinking authority. Why did you do it? I asked, and the question scraped my throat raw. I did not mean the affair. I meant the photograph, the note, the choice to weaponize intimacy. She folded her fingers together and watched them as if they were foreign. Because nothing else worked, she said. Because I needed you to see me and not the person you were pretending I was. That's not an answer. My voice was steadier than I felt. You hurt me. She nodded as if it were a simple fact of physics. Yes. Her hand went to her mouth. I hurt you the only way I could think would make you look at us. We sat in the room that had once been neutral and now hummed with accusation. For a while neither of us spoke. Outside, a bus sighed past and somewhere a dog barked like an anxious thing demanding to be let in. My head was heavy with details, the tilt of her smile in the photograph, the way the man's hand rested at the small of her back. Betrayal, I had thought, would be a bright explosive thing. Instead it had the color of laundry left in a washer too long. You left me, I said finally, before. You chose him in a photograph where I couldn't be there. You. No, she said, voice a brittle reed. I chose a break. I chose a device. I chose to fail you, to give you the proof of what you had stopped seeing. Stopped seeing what? My patience had the thinness of a paper cup. That I'm a husband. That I loved you. Or that I'm. The rest of the sentence collapsed like an old bridge. How do you say the thing you suspect about yourself without confessing? How do you impale your own heart and expect it to behave? She breathed, slow and small. That you were dying, in a way. Not physically, your body was fine. But you were disappearing into your routines, into the small numbing acts. I loved you across decades and somehow forgot that love is also an action. Her eyes found mine. You were present and absent. You were kind and invisible. I thought I needed something dramatic to get you angry enough to fight. I thought if I broke us in the worst way, you'd either leave, which would be simpler for both of us, or you'd wrestle us back. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the calculus, an affair as an experiment in salvage. The thought had the lunacy of a person who'd confused damage for medicine. So you hurt me to save me, I said, each word an attempt to make a sentence out of the paradox. Yes, she said. I thought the pain would clear the fog. There was a sputter of life in me then, an animal thing that wanted to jump and claw and insist on order. Instead, I found myself asking, who is Jonah? She flinched at the name like a bad song on the radio. Jonah was the easiest archive of what I'd been, she said. He was something I had allowed to live, like a secret garden, and then I shut the gate because it hurt to admit the garden existed at all. Why him and not me? The question was both accusation and plea. I wanted the simplicity of either or. I wanted to be villain or victim with no messy middle. Because he would make you jealous in a specific way. Not the jealous that demands revenge, the jealous that would make you feel the loss of us concretely. Because Jonah had the history that could show you what you were already losing, laughter that belonged to me before I learned to be small for you. I wanted you to see that you were not the only architect of our life, that other things lived inside me. I was trying, idiotic as it sounds, to give you evidence that something had to change. Her confession did not land with the relief I had expected. Instead it made a deeper crater. Everything she had done, the photograph, the note, the orchestrated disappearances, was an act of violence dressed as triage. She admitted it plainly. She had engineered a wound. Did you sleep with him? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. This was the place where betrayal and agreement met. A single syllable would tilt the scale. She closed her eyes. Yes. The world narrowed down to the geometry of the word. I tasted iron. My breath came in as if through a straw. I tried to imagine the image in the photograph as a scene without the stab of ownership, but ownership is what made the image obscene. The idea that another hand knew the slope of her shoulder, that another voice knew the laughter I had once monopolized. Did you love him? I asked, cheap and furious. No, she said. Not in the way I loved you. It was different. It was a thing that fit into a pocket of me that you had never visited. I don't have words for it that will make it smaller. I am sorry. We argued until noon like people who had been rehearsing separation for years. The argument was not a single volcano but a slow erosion, voices raised, accusations. The kind of small cruelties that arrive when two people stop trusting the same language. We accused and blamed and circled each other looking for a fault line to step through. I raised my hands to stop, to say, enough. But the truest thing I could say was simpler and uglier. I had wanted to be the one to change us, and she had chosen a method that made me the victim and her the architect. It felt like the theft of my narrative. That night she left a letter on my pillow. It was not a long letter. It was the kind of thing that reads better when it is brief. There couldn't have been different admission. She wrote about the years when we were young and how she had learned to take less so that I could have more, dreams, accolades, the latitude of youthful selfishness. She wrote about the ways she had swallowed shards of herself to keep the house from arguing. She wrote about Jonah's laugh in college, a laughter that had once been contagious enough to make her breathe. She explained, in the half-credible honesty of someone trying to justify violence with benevolence, that she had underestimated the cruelty of trying to force a person to save themselves. Then, in the last lines, she wrote something I did not expect. If loving me makes you small, then you must choose whether you want to be more. I wanted you to be more without me having to break you open. I am so sorry. I read the letter over and over until the words blurred. They were an explanation no apology could redeem. The finality of the paper frightened me more than any photograph. With the letter was a key to a storage locker and a note. There are photos. There is the rest of what I thought you should see. Take them if you must. I had imagined a confession would be explosive, cinematic. Instead, Lena handed me a cardboard box and the terrible consent to know. I drove to the storage place like a man walking toward an execution of his own making. Inside the box were more photographs, frames of moments I had not wanted to see. There were two things in particular that changed the geometry of grievance. First, a photo of Lena and Jonah in a hospital room, both pale, both smiling like people taking refuge in small human rituals. Second, a folded piece of paper with a line of handwriting that was not Lena's but Jonah's. He needs to wake up. He will not unless you break him open. J. The hospital photograph reframed everything. The light in it was sterile, the edges sharp. Lena's hand in Sunday light and Jonah's hand curled around it like a compass. The note, the ugly moral fulcrum, admitted intent. Jonah had been the instrument of the wound. He had written the sentence that made the orchestration sound less like a private madness and more like a conspiracy. I found Jonah because I needed to brand his face with meaning. He was not hard to find. Small towns keep conspirators in the open. He met me in a coffee shop where he was peeling an orange like an afterthought. He looked younger than I expected, his jaw soft and bewildered. When I presented the photo, he didn't look surprised. "You should have seen the first time," he said. "She wanted to shock you. She wanted to shock me." My voice had the brittle edge of a man on the verge of breaking. "You helped her." "It was my idea," he admitted. "But not in the way you think." His admission came without glee. He told me about days at a hospice where his mother had died, about the way grief polishes people to a point where everything either cuts or heals. He told me about Lena visiting him when she thought no one would notice, about the way they sat on plastic chairs while the world outside carried on. "She didn't want to destroy you," he said. "She wanted to scare you awake. She thought, maybe foolishly, that if she gave you the worst, you'd finally save yourself." The explanation was a poor salve. It didn't make the photograph less true. It didn't compose the damage into something forgivable. What it did, paradoxically, was reveal the structure of our betrayal. It wasn't just an affair. It was a deliberate crucible to force me to change, and in that act she had weaponized intimacy. I left Jonah and drove home into a rain that blurred the city into watercolor. In the rearview mirror, Lena's cottage lights were small, patient, like eyes watching. I thought of all the ways we negotiate survival in marriage. The lies that keep us gentle, the omissions that keep us from killing each other's small mercies. I thought of the arithmetic of love. How much pain is allowed to purchase the possibility of future tenderness? There is no moral ledger that balances such transactions. The next morning we sat across from each other at our kitchen table and tried to be people capable of a version of goodness we did not yet know. Lena reached for my hand, and I did not pull away. The touch felt like a treaty being signed with tentative ink. She said she would stop orchestrating wounds. She said she would go to therapy and stop disappearing. She said she would tell me before she spoke with Jonah again. Her promises were the ordinances of people who have been awake at night and counted the cost of living. "I can't promise I'll forgive you today," I said. "I can't promise I won't imagine you with someone else and have my stomach drop. But I can promise I'll try to understand why you thought this was the only path." She nodded as if the promise was a bridge. "And I can't promise I won't make mistakes," she said. "But I can promise not to hurt you on purpose again." There are moments when people choose to be better in front of one another and moments when they choose to be better in secret. We chose both. We attended therapy. We visited the places that had once been neutral, the park where we had first kissed, the little diner where we had our first terrible breakfast as a married couple. We rebuilt trust like carpenters, cautious and measuring twice. Months passed and the wound scarred, it never vanished. Some nights the photograph would intrude, a sharp constellation in my memory, and I'd feel the old stinging. Other nights, the recollection softened into a lesson that had nothing to do with absolution. I had been negligent in small, corrosive ways. Lena had acted out of love that had mutinied into cruelty. Jonah had been a catalyst and a tool. The betrayal had been both intimate and institutionalized, part sin, part desperate attempt at salvation. The final twist did not come like a revelation so much as a sober accounting. One evening, going through the box of photographs one last time, I found a photograph I had missed. Lena, alone on a hospital bench, eyes closed, a tear tracking a clean line down her cheek. On the back she had written, in a hand that trembled, "Forgive me for the way I hurt you. Forgive me for thinking violence could be medicine. Forgive me for the ways I held back until the only language left was harm." I let the photograph sit on my palm for a long time. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a single act but a compound interest paid slowly. It requires honesty from both parties and courage to look at the parts of yourself you do not like. It requires naming the ways you betrayed one another not as excuses but as maps to better understanding. We did not end with dramatic flourish. We did not leap into a fairy tale reconciliation nor into a cinematic divorce. We remade a life that acknowledged the fracture, less seamless, more aware, attentive to the small daily choices that either erode or fortify. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to stop protecting them from the truth and, painfully, to stop protecting yourself from what you have done. On a slow morning 3 seasons later we sat on our stoop and watched a child across the street tumble off his bike and scrape his knee. Lena flinched as if she remembered every fall she'd ever kissed. I moved without thinking, gathered a bandage, a kiss, a promise. We are, in the end, assemblers of small mercies, trying to glue the world together enough to be bearable. The photograph never disappeared. It remained in a drawer like an unhealed constellation, a reminder that love can be both a shelter and a weapon, and that sometimes the only way back to one another is to walk through the fire, scorched and trembling, and to find one another on the other side.